Okay, before I start, I just wanted to let you know, give you an idea of what Paraween, how Paraween came about real quickly and why we're even here. Salem actually is only about 2 hours from where I grew up, and obviously Salem represents a unique history. And our family has a very unique history as well. Our family actually has the very first UFO-related case to be inducted into state as historically true. So we made history. 2 hours from here. That plaque behind you right there is from the governor of Massachusetts when they inducted our case into the archives of Massachusetts, antiquity. There's actually a park, a UFO park, about 2 hours from here in Sheffield, Massachusetts, dedicated to our family that's open to the public. It's sponsored by the Roswell UFO Museum, Travis Walton and Ben Hansen from Fact or Faked, and a few others from Louisiana. I like to talk about it because if you read what's in the papers, you get a lot of mixed, stories. They don't really cover it well. They cover it with a lot of sensationalism and things like that. And I think it takes the truth out of it. It kind of rips it from what it really is. I try to be very careful as to not overstate things. I mean, where we were in Sheffield, Massachusetts, for those who don't know, that was where the mining came from for the atom bomb back in the 40s. I mean, they were mining for magnesium in the area. There was a lot of government in the area. There are historians to this day that still live there that remembered us as children, who played, baseball with us, who are now on the Historical Society. Our bankers are very astute and well off in the area, and they've all come forward and discussed it. So I'm going to give you an idea of how all this happened, okay? Okay, I'm going to break this down into 4 parts. We got the state induction letters, which were also notarized by a judge. The September 69 event, which is how this whole thing came about, and then the official induction, and now the UFO Monument Park that actually sits 2 hours from here, which is sponsored by the Roswell Museum in our honor. Okay, part 1. This is actually the letter that we first received from the Great Barrington Historical Society. In the beginning, it really was inducted locally first, then it went to state, and then it went to Governor Weiker's office. That is actually the letter that came to me on behalf. They investigated it, and I'll tell you what they looked at for that to happen. But that is the actual letter. Can you read that? Is that big enough? This is actually also, this letter came from the Historical Society, but at the same time it was also notarized by a circuit court judge. And in the beginning you saw Debbie talking about getting a memorandum of law, that kind of thing. So these letters that we received were actually also sealed by a judge. This is the envelope that came from the governor's office, Governor Charles Baker, I guess it is. And that was the letter I received from him. Now, I received 2 citations from the governor's office, not just one. One inducted our family into history, and one inducted the incident itself into the state of Massachusetts. I'll give you a minute to read it. There's a copy of it right on the back wall there. And that is actually the plaque that's on the monument in Sheffield, Massachusetts. Okay, so I thought I'd show you this too. After it was installed and the park was given to us and the monument was in place, it was obviously vandalized. So this is actually, yeah, twice. So this is actually the police department showing the UFO monument had been vandalized and that sort of thing. So I wanted you to know this. It is backed by the state. It is backed by the city and township as well. And there again, it was actually vandalized twice. So if you might have seen some of the news coverage about it, it was going to be moved. They didn't know if they were going to keep it there because it was getting I don't know, it just became a target for vandalism. So that's me. Anybody familiar with Ski Butternut? Yeah, well that's where I was riding, actually. I used to ride in competition there and I was getting ready to head out. So what really happened? Well, we used to own this village on the Green Restaurant, which is still in Sheffield, Massachusetts today. And we we were coming back from Ski Butternut, and I was with my mother. I didn't fare well in the competitions, and so we left a little bit early. And because it was a holiday weekend, we decided to have it stay open later and have the cook keep the place open until, I don't know, 10 o'clock or so. We normally close right after lunch. Well, we came in, went around the back, made sure the chairs were up, grabbed the money for the night deposit box, the drop, went to the bank, dropped it off, and my grandmother had gone into Silk's store, which was right next to our restaurant, and that became important because she had just, Tarrington cigarettes back in the day. She grabbed some cigarettes, and and they remembered her coming in there. And we had left and gone over the Sheffield covered bridge, which is right there. That's what it used to look like. So we came in from this side, and by the time we came out this end over here, we had seen what looked like a light coming up from this side of the bridge. Now, the clips you saw from the show the UFO over our car. It wasn't over our car. It was behind a line of trees. That's pretty much what we saw. So when we came out, we would have came out this way, and looking back through the window of the station wagon, all we really saw was a light. Well, anyways, we went down the road further. There was a bank of trees there, and there's a cornfield. And so we're going down this very narrow dirt road, and we see this light flickering through the bushes and trees, and whether or not it was us moving, if it was stationary, I don't know, but I just remember the way it flickered. And so I'm looking at it, my brother was to my right, we're looking at it, and we kept going down this dirt road, and the further we went, we noticed it was still with us on the other side on the bank of trees. We came to a clearing and we stopped. Now, my mother doesn't know if the car stopped on its own, if she stopped it, whatever, but we did pull off to the right, and you could hear like this clanking of stones. It got very silent. It was very calm, and it just, like someone flipped a switch off on life itself, it was just dead. And my brother noticed something off to the right which looked like a light or an amber glow of some kind off in a field, and so I'm looking at my brother to my right, looking at this, and I'm looking back at this craft, and everything in our car at that time was dark because it was higher than the trees. Then I realized, or going back a long time, but I could see inside the car. I could see the dashboard. I could see the back of my mother's head. I could see the radio. So the light had come into the car. Either it lowered or it was brighter. But at the time we saw it, it was like a 2-watt bulb. It wasn't like super, super bright. It was just like like an upside down Hershey's Kiss, if that makes sense. Because the light, maybe the reflection of the water, whatever, that's what it looked like. And so we're looking at the thing going back and forth, and then I remember just like this dead, and then the eruption of crickets and katydids, and it got really, really loud, and then I don't remember being in the car anymore. I was in what I recall as like an airplane hangar. And so people say to me, well, were you abducted? Well, we were taken by the car by something. I don't remember what took us from the car. So I don't like to overstate anything. But that's what the craft actually looked like, once you could see through the light of it, to give you an idea. So next thing I remember, I'm in this room, and I remember getting off some type of a cart or a table that reminded me of something in school where you had a projector in your classroom, and you could, you had the slide projector, and you're working in school, and you had those silver carts with the wheels on it. I remember something like that to my right, one or two of them. And I remember at one point looking at this large open room, and there were what looked like fluorescent lights, maybe about 2 or 3 feet in length in a space, and towards where the wall meets the ceiling, a space, a light, a space, a light. And it was fairly dark, but I could see a little bit. And then this door opened up, and I was grabbed by my left arm, harshly, and walked out this area, and I would have taken a right, and I was brought into a room. This is the best way that I can describe the layout. I remember it pretty well. I was taken out the room here, walked and took a left. These walls were not smooth and soft. They were left and rights. They were very tall ceilings. And I was brought into, let me see. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So I was brought into this room where this wall bowed inward like a can, and it was like a glass or a plexiglass. And there was a pocket on one to the left side, and there was a pocket off to the right. and I was sitting on this, what looked like maybe a table or stool or something, and I saw something that looked very disturbing to me. It looked like a bug or an ant of something that it wasn't human. It wasn't what you would refer to as a gray or what. It was just like it looked like a genetically engineered something. I remember that scaring me. I got up off the table and I ran out the other side of this bowed-in area, and I came into a large circle room with markings on the floor, and there were 2 hallways off to the right, one about the lane, it was wide as two cars perhaps, like a 2-lane road on the far corner and next to me, and then where maybe those doors was about twice as wide, like a 4-lane road. It was about as wide as it would have been. And I stopped, I didn't know where to go. I was taken back into the room, and then I started trying to make sense of everything, reflecting back, and I was put on a table, and this piece came over me. The table came up, and this piece lowered over me, and I felt a couple bumps to the head, and I was back in the room again. Now, going back and looking at what I remember and looking at an autopsy table, they're very similar. You know, this is what I remembered and drew as, you know, had someone draw for me a long time ago. And then I went and said, wow, that looks oddly familiar. So again, I don't know where I went, who took me, or what happened, but that was what it reminded me of. So these are some notes I've made about the walls and how they seemed to illuminate a little bit. They were dark, the piece that covered me. And this is pretty much what I remember seeing. I drew that as a child. That hangs in Roswell. And this, of course, was with the help of the gentleman who helped me do that. So, but that is very close to what I saw. It doesn't look like anything else anyone else remembers or anyone else reflects on, but I remember the legs looked like bamboo, and it had like a teardrop body and a head of like a football. Now, when we got back to the car, which is when we kind of regained consciousness, if you will, in some respects, my mother and grandmother were now reversed. My grandmother was actually in the driver's seat, and my mother was actually the one driving the car. So again, to me, that's human error. And my brother was to my right, and his head was on my knee. I wasn't awake at that time when my grandmother first started the car and drove down the road, but shortly afterward. My grandmother, not being the first to awake and being in the driver's seat, took the car down the Sheffield Road near the bridge, turned it around, and went back to town, went back where she got her cigarettes, went back to Silks. Thinking it was only about 15 or 20 minutes later, it had been hours later, and they were closing now. But she had just gone in there for cigarettes, in her mind, not that long ago. So that became crucial. So, because there's receipts and stuff. So she pulls the car, she drives past the Sheffield Green, comes back around where the green was, and because she was going too fast, she missed it, came back, opened up the door, and the store was right to her left. I think when the door slammed is when I woke up, because I saw her walking. I said the road, but it's like a break in the road where the stores all allow the kids to ride their bikes and park and everything. And so I saw her. She was probably about where that door is, and I got out and followed her into Silks. And she went right by the clerk, got into the back of the store where there were carts and bicycles, and she started pushing this baby carriage back and forth, and she was really kind of confused. And so I started grabbing her hand saying, you know, Nana, let's go. And so when she went past the clerk again, she kind of stopped, didn't really say anything that I remember, and we got back to the car. My mother was now awake, my brother was not. And so at this point, we got in the car and we drove home. Well, we didn't know that it went out on the news that night. We didn't know that WSBS had broadcast a sighting over the bridge, over the Reed farm. Now our farm, we had in '66 and '67 had 2 other sightings, where we saw that disc even better. Why that is so important is because we had that restaurant. We would talk about what we saw in '66 and '67 at the restaurant, of course, to a mixed feelings about it. And because of that, there were police records, because there were push and shove situations, had people having to be escorted out of the restaurant. My mother was 26, 27 at the time she was single. So it got a little rough for her. So that generated, documentation. And a lot of the people that ate there then are now still in town and remember it. Matter of fact, the chief of police there, his son has the gas station next door to the restaurant today, and one of the people who gave testimony to the Historical Society. Anyway, WSBS broadcast the craft to Sheffield. People were calling the police department. So when we went back to work, my mother did, and I used to ride in with her in the morning to get breakfast and then go ride my bike to school. They all felt, all of a sudden, we're sorry we didn't believe you. It was like a reckoning, my friends saw it too, that kind of thing. So even though it was very traumatic for us, it was a reckoning because until that point, it was difficult for my mother to even go to work. So this is a little clip from another show about it, and it's pretty accurate, except we weren't in a convertible. That would have been nice, right? Yeah, there's no audio with this, that's, But this was kind of what it was like. The odd thing was my mother actually had been driving, and we came too. She was in the passenger seat. I mean, to me, that, like a lot of times I do interviews and I say, well, I wouldn't use the word abducted because I don't know who pulled us from that car. Was it government related? Was it, who knows what it was? So this is where in theory, my grandmother got confused and behind these bikes and carts and just kind of walked behind him. And I remember grabbing her hand like this, trying to pull her, but there were bikes in the way, which made no sense to me either, because I guess I wasn't thinking clearly either. But anyway, that store is still there today, and they still remember that. Because it used to be talked about at a restaurant that sat next door to it. So this case wasn't about our family so much, it was about the town, it was about the restaurant. And I think that's what kept it alive. And because it was a community piece, a lot of people still to this day, have a family member or someone who saw something and they don't want that person tarnished, so they say, yeah, well, I remember that. We stuck up for that person. Anyway, something I want to mention to you too is that there were magnetic fields around our vehicle that spun a compass. So we did a little research on hertz. So a 6.6 hertz that you can actually cause depression. 7.83 is like a feel good, and 10 hertz is a hypnotic state. So being that we had these fields around our vehicle and your brain operates with neurons and so on, that could have been a factor in why we went out. All right, this is the Sheffield area. Now, if you look into the news about it and you look into the activity or whatever has been found around Sheffield, have you heard about the crop circles in the fields out there in Sheffield now that have been found in 2012, 2013? Very weird. So anyway, there were some crop circles, believe it or not, in Sheffield in the cornfields, and I think that also kept the whole thing alive too, because it made news. All right, so after all this, after we discussed this, the restaurant, everything that happened, our testimony, everybody getting involved, we were, they wanted to know who we were, and when they came to us to say, okay, we might do something about this, and I'll tell you what happened. On October 2nd, 1992, our attorney, Robert Bletchman, who Peter knows, was a Democrat and a good friend of my father's. And he was looking into he was actually affiliated with MUFON at the time, a public relations director, and was working with, or interested in the Hudson River Valley case. And because our case was over water, and there was some anomalies with our vehicle, he was also very interested in Cash Landerman, and just found our incident to have some odd ties to it. And because my father was an attorney at the time and in public office, he was a mayor, he wanted to be able to say, this isn't just crazy people, not wackadoodles or idiots that see this, you know, all that stuff. They're credible people who see this stuff too. So it was just a side mention of our case. The odd thing was my father got killed on the same day. Not the same day, the same date. Same date, yeah. And it was very strange because he was actually working in Connecticut at the time, and he went to work perfectly fine, had hit the desk, was rushed to Yale, New Haven, and we lost him. But of every day that could have happened. So again, it drove people to say, what happened? You know, that's an awfully odd date to pass on when you're perfectly healthy. So again, there were all these things that kept circling back around to what happened in 1969. From the magnesium, to Bletchman, to my father, to those that still in town. So it never died out. It just they kept talking about it. So anyway, the questions that came to us when they decided to look into it to see if they could do something in memory of my late father, originally they asked if law enforcement was involved. Yes, they were. Did credible local media report on it? Yes, they did. WSBS had the archives. Were there third parties that went under oath? Yes. Did I pass my polygraph test? Was there an Air Force category? You know, did they give it a rating? It was a CE1, I think. Anyway, solid witnesses. These are the questions that came to me, our family. And of course, we answered every one of them. And so that's WSBS back in the day that actually aired it. And of course, they gave written testimony as well. And that was the letter that they wrote to Roswell and to the state about where they reported on it. And then, of course, the officer wrote a letter as well. Is the opinion of this based on a whole evidence and interviews with the brothers, physical evidence collected, that we encountered, had an encounter with an unknown powerful force. I mean, that's, well, what else would you say? We don't need that. How am I doing with time?
You're at 2:18.
Okay. Anyway, this is some of the information on the officer. I've got to speed this up a little bit. This was the report that was given out of South Egremont, Massachusetts that night that ended up being filtered to WSBS radio. And I guess you guys know where South Egremont is. And these are 3 copies of letters that I got from the Historical Society, all from responsible local, I guess they've been there a whole year. This is Gina Paul. She used to ride a school bus with me. She remembered hearing the news broadcast, and I think that's Galata, the Galata family from Sheffield, and anybody knows Sheffield or Great Barrington knows the Galatas. Running short on time. There was my polygraph test, which I paid for, by the way. And thank God I passed it, because I would have been like, that was a waste of $700. A lot of people say to me, well, you know, there's a lot of money to be made in this thing, or a lot of press, or, you know, you're just trying to get famous. You know how all that is, right? I actually used to own Miami Models, one of the largest model management companies in the state of Florida. I represented the Miami Dolphins cheerleaders. I worked on several, I got the cover of like, oh my God, so many magazines, child magazines. I worked with children mostly. And because of that, I did have some ties in film to get the word out with media. So I think the fact I was able to get that too. I was able to get a little bit more behind me than some people. But Paraween actually used to be, I used to put on events in Miami, and Paraween was my company that I did that with. So now I'm taking all that, putting it aside, and I'm using Paraween right now to bring attention to historic and I guess what the media won't be fair about. And I think that there's an awful lot that we experience, we see, we feel, we've been experienced, and there's not really a place to really exploit that and to look at it and talk about it. And I think there's a need for that. And there's a lot of Comic-Cons out there, but there aren't a lot of events, I think, that really help. And I think that's what Paraween is going to do. I'm looking to get more and more people involved in this and share what they've seen and their experiences. And anyway, back to Miami Models. I had a 5-year package campaign for Love's Diapers. That little redheaded kid on the diaper bag was Daniel Pinto. Nike, Polo, Bad Boys. Anyway, that's my background. My grandmother, again, this is really weird, my grandmother was the governess to William and Carol Roosevelt. So until I was 2 years old, I actually lived in Colorado, and my grandmother was their governess, so I actually lived at their place. Oddly enough, she supported my mother's husband to run for office, which is why he got elected, and why there's been a political tie with our family. And my father, you guys know what that is. And Christopher Dodd supported my dad in his run for office. And if you look at the date, October 2nd. It was actually mentioned at the UN on October 2nd. And there's Christopher Dodd's letter in support of my father's run, and town of Canaan, for those who know where Canaan is, where my father was in office. And again, the event itself at the UN was October 2nd. So all these things kind of came full circle, and how this got inducted. And again, there's the medical records, passed to my father. And the attorney who we saw speaking, helping us get the information authenticated. Now, she actually was going, when we got these letters signed and sealed, she was actually driving back from the courthouse, and she got run off the road into oncoming traffic, and some guy told her to back off or whatever. So she had never had that incident or problem before, so she associated it with the fact that she had something to do with me and was trying to get these letters. I don't know, but I know she backed off. That's her police report, and she hasn't talked to me since. So, yeah. And then I had this lovely gentleman knock on my door. I thought it was like a Kirby vacuum salesman or something. He had the Kmart manager pants and the blue tie and blue shirt. He's knocking on my door at 10 o'clock in the morning, sat me down on my front steps. He was from Key Point Government Solutions. He asked me a lot of questions. Do I travel internationally? Am I savvy with computers? Do I still live here? Do my mother and father, family? Well, everything. He already knew everything about me. And then at the end, he asked me to raise my right hand and swear to the Privacy Act in 1974 and made me promise never to talk about it. So, yep. Anyway, this is an old article about the Reed case and Bletchman. It's an old MUFON article from way back when. That's actually an old phone book of mine with his number in it. And then some information about the UN, and that's from Jan Harzing about Robert Bletchman and our family's connection, and so on and so forth from MUFON. And this is some of the information. This is Sheffield. Now, some of you may remember the crop circle talk in Sheffield that took place in 2012, 2013, maybe even 14, the corn stalks. This is right next to the monument. This is not far from where the monument is. This is recent photos taken by people over the corn where we saw the UFO back in 1969. It's still going on today. It's crazy. So I got on the cover of the Boston Globe, right there. I didn't blow anyone up either. And that was in February 2015. And of course, some other papers. So they did a full-blown story on it. It got inducted. Everyone voted on it, went to a census. They said there was enough there to prove that our case altered the natural progression of the community. So because it altered the natural progression of the community, it was historically significant. And so there are your letters. The monument has gotten some attention. They already shot a couple films there. The corn grows 14 to 15, someone said 16 feet tall there. I don't know if that's normal or not, but it seems kind of tall to me. And then, of course, it got defaced again, but at least they're being a little more responsible. The powerful symbol has been vandalized. And this is what it looks like today. So there's the UFO Monument Park that now stands 2 hours from here in recognition of the first UFO case to be inducted in the United States, and it just happens to be in Massachusetts. So, and our sponsors, Roswell UFO Museum, Factor Faked, and my friend Travis over there, Fire in the Sky, have all contributed to a bench. And the monument used to be over here. They did move it back over here, and now they're widening the area. Yeah, we can run this real quick, I guess. You guys got any questions for me? Was it all that clear, really? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned like you were taken from room to room. What were you taken by? Those creatures that you described?
No, it was like just like a person, a smaller person. I was 9 years old, and whoever grabbed me was not that much bigger than me, but they were very strong. Grabbed my left arm, and I was pushed they were behind me, and I was like walked and pushed very hard. It was very militant. It was very rough, and again I was taken out a door to the right, and the whole time I was almost being pushed from behind until I was brought into this room that had that area that bowed inward like glass.
So these were people?
The thing is, at the time, I was 9 years old, right? So I'm reflecting back, but, if I, maybe bald, and smaller, but strong. I mean, I don't want to overstate and say, yeah, it was a hybrid person or something like that, but it resonated to me like that, even though I can't prove it, obviously. So I try to stay to what I can prove. Also, I'm very limited to what I can say, believe it or not. I have an agreement with the state. I can't use certain terminology. I have got to refrain from certain references, and that's a legal binding document. And if I stray too far, there's a chance they could throw it out of the Historical Society, because it's not just in Great Barrington anymore, it's in state. All the information from Great Barrington went to the State Historical Society in Boston, I guess it is. And what they said was, well, we don't have anyone who specializes in UFO events. If it was something to do with the Boston Tea Party or whatever, yes, we could say yay or nay. So they said, would the polygraph test, the statements and everything they had no reason to say no. And then once they kind of put their stamp of approval on it, for lack of, they didn't, I guess they condoned it. Then it went to the governor's office, and they issued 2 citations. And then those citations got stamped by a circuit court judge. It's pretty cool, actually. With everything I've accomplished, this is what I'll go down in history for. Yeah.
Has your family members made corroborating statements?
I'm sorry?
Your family members.
Yeah.
Have they made corroborating statements?
Oh, sure. My mother's spoken. My mother's, my father was a big supporter of it, even though he was my stepfather. Here's an interesting thing, and it's a good question. When we had the restaurant back in Sheffield, my mother was single at the time. And so they would come in, and a lot of these people with suspenders and smelling like horse manure would stand in the front of my mother's restaurant while people are trying to drink orange juice. It just didn't, go well. So my father was visiting from New York, and so he was more of a New Yorker, had a little bit more of an edge to him maybe, and that's how they met. He came to her aid and said, "Hey, listen, you want that to go, or do you want to eat it here? If you're going to eat it here, you're gonna behave yourself, or you can take it out in the truck, So that's how they met. But he was a big supporter because he saw the painful moments that we were experiencing as a family in that restaurant due to this, and this was not a negative thing to us in a lot of ways either. I don't look at this as the UFOs as being something horrible. If there was something negative that would have came from it, we certainly didn't have anything negative. It was tough for us to deal with, and I think make sense of and rationalize, because one side of your head saying, okay, well, I got to make sense of this, and the other side saying, well, just use your, be intuitive and go with it. But at the same time, I think we've become enlightened a little bit and have opened our minds maybe a little bit more. I mean, we were living in a small town right at the time. We could have been up, being kind of, living a sheltered life, but this kind of opened things up for us. So, and I started carrying a camera for the rest of my life. I said, I'll ever see it again, I'm going to get a picture of it, right? And I ended up, being a fashion photographer. So, maybe it all worked out. Maybe it was meant to be. But anyway, that's any other questions before I bring in the U.F.O. Roswell Museum? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Have you had any major sightings of objects since? And second part is, have you ever had hypnotic regression?
I tried it once with Yvonne Smith a couple of years ago, and it didn't really do anything for me, except I will share this. This is frigging bizarre. I met with her for like 2 or 3 hours, and she did try to put me under. I swear to God, I thought I was hearing lawnmowers in the background. I didn't think, I was ever going to go out. And afterwards, you know, maybe it brought a couple things more into light for me, but I don't like doing that because I don't want to get confused with my conscious memory. Anyway, Lori Wagner was there, Yvonne was there, and we went down the stairs of my house, and sure enough, we came around the back side of my house, and you couldn't see out the windows. They were covered with ladybugs. Covered with, like, really? You know what I mean? Ladybugs all over the side of my house, all blocking the light. We couldn't see. We thought it was dark out. And Lori Wagner took some pictures of it. And it's just, right? And the article, the Boston Globe article that came out, actually came out on my late father's birthday. The governor's citation came out on my mother's birthday, October 27th. Right? It's just, it's unbelievable. You had a question, right? Buck over here?
Well, it was, he had asked it too. Have you had any other UFO?
Oh, I'm sorry, part two. Yeah, I've seen a couple things. I've seen more apparitions. I've seen like a smudge mark going across my wall. I've seen things like that more. It's kind of opened my mind up to more of a paranormal type of thing. Like I've seen what looks like almost a door, a black, almost the size of a door, off the ground, shooting across our property. And I actually spoke to the Witch of Sleepy Hollow about it, who's going to come on later. And she didn't have anything positive to say about that, so I guess, you know, I should have ran the other way. But, you know, I really, that's more of anything. That's what I see. I just kind of, I sense things sometimes. I'm really sensitive about things. I can, you know, tell someone's looking at me or watching me or behind me kind of thing. I was watching TV one day, late at night, and the guy was working on my porch, and had left his tool belt outside of my porch. So Joe calls me and says, you know, I got to come over and pick it up. I'm like, sure, stop over. He opens the front door of my house. I just, you know, let him, you know, come on in. And then he turns around and shuts the door really quickly, and this mark about the size of a loaf of bread goes across my wall and up the staircase. And he thought, he goes, you got a black cat? I'm like, no, I don't have a cat. But he saw it as well. And that's the kind of thing that it almost seems like either okay, one more thing that goes with this. How many people remember Peter Riley, the death in Canaan, Barbara Gibbons case, the murder in Canaan, Connecticut? They made a movie about it with Brian Dennehy. Okay. Well, after we moved from Sheffield, after all the heat, guess what house my father bought? So, yeah. So we bought the house, the barn, and of course the little cottage where Peter Riley and his family had that slain. And only because it was right smack in town, he wanted to run for office in Connecticut, and it came up for sale, and of course he got it really cheaply, and he used to have Peter Riley as a student, so, you know, he didn't think he had anything to do with it. Let's fix it up, we'll tear the cottage down. He planted a garden over it, but for the next couple of years, I lived there. And again, I had very unsettling feelings about it. I couldn't go in the house. It bothered me more so than anyone else in the family. My brother a lot too, but so yeah, I've had a life like that. You know, I've had a life of just strangeness, and sometimes I think too hard. I try to put it together, and the more I think about it, I think the more confused I get. So it is what it is. You know, I'm part of something. I'm glad to be part of it. I'm glad to be here, and hope you guys had a good time. Thanks for coming, guys.